Hello everyone, so in my last video I said this. BTS are 100% the blueprint, and if they aren't, then tell me why every other group is following their career moves to a T. And now I am here to deliver, so like, subscribe, do all of that, and let's just get into it. When I say BTS are the blueprint, I am not siding with some armies who think BTS invented the very definition of music, nor am I siding with those who think BTS are just a cog like many others in a K-pop machine. There is a real problem with people going to each extreme and not understanding that sometimes staying in the center or neutrally looking at the issue is often the best way to stay balanced. I find it really funny when people have such a strong reaction to the phrase BTS paved the way or that they are the blueprint. It's almost on instinct that they start yelling about second-generation K-pop idols or Gangnam Style. It's almost like me saying BTS are the blueprint is discrediting other artists when all I'm saying is that BTS are the reason K-pop is so well known internationally and has become such a worthy competitor to the mainstream West. We'll get into that more, but before that, I will wholly acknowledge the impact of second-generation idols. They pioneered a lot of trends that BTS followed. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them inspired BTS to even become idols. But how are you going to talk about second-generation idols and not talk about first-generation K-pop idols? Because surely they came first, so they're the ones who deserve all the credit. But then again, when we look at these groups such as H.O.T., who are widely considered to be the first K-pop group, they were heavily inspired by the music of the 1960s, which of course was inspired by their predecessors in the 1950s, and then the 1940s, which goes back to the 1930s, and it keeps on going all the way back to Beethoven, or no, Mozart, or Bach? But if we rewind even more, music actually comes from the Paleolithic period, so the credit should actually go to no one. See, if we're going to act like music itself has been invented by BTS, then I get your point that armies are delusional and I just say ignore us and walk away. They have also got the definition or meaning of this phrase wrong. So let's talk about what we really mean when we say BTS paved the way. And of course, if we're gonna have an objective discussion, you're gonna have to get rid of your hate boner against BTS before we get started. BTS did not invent K-pop or the Korean idol system or self-produced music or putting words to paper, paper to instrument, instrument to mic, and mic to greasy waxy ears. But it was BTS's global success around 2017 that has made K-pop an international force to be reckoned with. Does that mean no K-pop group has ever performed outside of Korea or made it onto these mainstream charts? Of course not. An example is Wonder Girls with Tell Me and Nobody back in 2007, so let's rewind and see how that turned out. Wonder Girls are a second-generation K-pop group formed in 2007 under JYP Entertainment. Their song Nobody charted at number 76 on the Billboard Hot 100, making Wonder Girls the first South Korean act to enter the chart. And while that is an absolutely huge achievement, let's talk about why that is more of a milestone but not quite paving the way. Just to elaborate, so it doesn't sound like I am dismissing their achievements, Wonder Girls definitely did do a lot when it comes to expanding into the West. But because their attempt was largely considered unsuccessful, their achievements, though legendary, were more of a one-time achievement or a one-group achievement, rather than a path that others could then follow, knowing that their venture left a lot to be desired. The difference here is when you look at all of these songs from Korea that did enter the Hot 100, so Wonder Girls entered the chart in 2009. The next K-pop song that would enter these charts wouldn't enter until 3 years later, and that was Gangnam Style, which basically tells us that K-pop wasn't really tackling these mainstream charts, despite its growing popularity with huge artists like Girls' Generation, 2NE1, Big Bang, SHINee, and more. It was still considered a niche interest far from the mainstream. I think people who bring up Wonder Girl's success in the West view it a bit differently than what it was. Their success was catapulted by two back-to-back catchy songs, Tell Me and Nobody. These songs were a huge success in Asia, especially after which JYP decided to push them into the Western market. However, for the time it wasn't a great decision as it cost them the Korean market, and eventually their venture into the West turned out to be short-lived. And this isn't me saying that, it's JYP. I believe this to be because he essentially forced this expansion instead of focusing on the organic growth that was happening with the Asian market, that the Wonder Girls were and could have continued dominating, but by the time he realized this and came back to promoting in Korea, he had the nation's girl group to compete with. Basically, to the Western market, the Wonder Girls were a cute little opener for the Jonas Brothers that then were largely ignored in favor of the Disney heartthrobs. There could be a bunch of reasons why this expansion didn't work out, from their music just not being what the market wanted, to luck, or to the fact that the racist West was just not ready to let a Korean group shine center stage. We know this isn't the last time they tried to sabotage a Korean act. Also, this whole thing is not to say that Western validation is the most important thing that could happen to K-pop. It just means that K-pop got opened up to the Western market, which is largely considered the mainstream or internationally is the most known or documented industry. I don't make the rules, I'm just telling you what they are. Also, so that I'm not rambling on about the Wonder Girls for an hour, if you want to know more about this, I will link a video below that talks about this in more detail. Moving on to Psy, he had what the Wonder Girls couldn't achieve at their time. He got the attention. Who didn't know Gangnam Style? In fact, Psy entered the Billboard Hot 100 4 times between 2013 to 2015, with his peak being at number 2. Despite that, Psy was also a niche, not for lack of fame or exposure, but because of how his music was received. Firstly, let's not beat around the bush and just talk about it. Gangnam Style was largely considered a meme. Despite being a banger, it was more talked about like a funny little internet thing rather than genuine Korean pop. If anything, it made the general public look at K-pop as this camp and meme genre, which at the time was great for short bursts, but ultimately not one where people would invest a lot of time and money to actually participate in the fan culture. This doesn't mean that Psy, in his own way, didn't pave the way. I wouldn't say he did it in the same way as BTS, where the industry now looks at K-pop as competition for charts and awards, but Psy definitely got eyes on K-pop, and that is a huge accomplishment as well. Not to say groups like EXO or Girls' Generation didn't have incredibly huge followings at the time. They absolutely pulled crazy numbers, just not big enough to compete with the Western giants at the time. Some argue it's because the American music industry just had too strong of a competition back then, while others have various other reasons. But realistically, despite being huge artists, K-pop was still a niche topic. As a comparison, these are various other foreign artists who have sold out concerts around the world and pulled huge numbers, but are still a niche for the mainstream audience. That was K-pop. It can get a bit hard for us to see this as K-pop fans because we assume everyone knows these idols and groups like we do, but the way we see some of these groups is a lot different than how they appeared to the mainstream. Also, let's quickly acknowledge the fact that this was a very disgusting time for K-pop fans who faced constant hate, harassment, and racism for their interests. I'd like to say it didn't last long, but I can't. And this is relevant because it definitely affects the audience in their reluctance or hesitance to fully engage in K-pop because of the backlash they could receive from society. Also, the Hot 100 is not the biggest mark of success, it is just something I am using to judge the success of K-pop songs amongst the mainstream. And despite their huge numbers, groups like Girls' Generation and EXO didn't enter these charts, which to me as a K-pop fan is just absurd. But it also shines a light on why BTS stood out so much. It's not that these other groups weren't successful, but it almost gives you more of an insight into how much BTS really had to do to get the mainstream public's attention. All of this isn't to say that all of these second-generation idols or K-pop groups who had these great achievements before BTS don't count. It is just that in the long run, they didn't break into the mainstream market the way BTS did, or the way a lot of groups after BTS did. Simply put, they were the first to be actually successful in the mainstream market, and people who think it was easy, it wasn't. I will acknowledge that BTS's expansion in the West was at a better time than Wonder Girls because K-pop had received more attention and the niche little fandoms were growing with the help of a lot of other K-pop groups at the time, including BTS. So you could say that the international market might have been a little more ready to hear out these niche genres, and their expansion had a demand. However, it is quite clear that they still looked at K-pop as this phenomenon that they could make a 15-minute segment on and then forget about. You can notice that in 2017 interviews of BTS, they are not treated like genuine artists who have been making music and performing for over 4 years. They are treated like little TikTokers or that Walmart yodel kid. Just like their predecessors, they were not seen as genuine competition. I'm sure a lot of big media outlets thought BTS would be a sparkly little ornament that the general public could enjoy for a few weeks and then forget about. Notice how very few times they were actually asked about their struggles making it into this business, their humble beginnings, or how they literally had to scrape their way to the top. Notice how very few times their self-produced music or intricate storylines were discussed. Nope, because they were seen as someone who was going to make noise during their 15 minutes of fame and then disappear. So why don't we ask them about what American artists they would like to collaborate with and what American shows they like to watch? Let's take their 15 minutes and use them to promote us. But what sucks for them is that, like the relative who comes over for dinner, BTS refused to leave after their 15 minutes. They seemed to stick around long after dessert was served, long after guests like them had left, because unlike what the industry had seen before, instead of people forgetting them and moving on to the next shiny bright thing, more and more people were noticing and loving BTS even more. They were now becoming competition. They were doing something no one else before them had achieved. Suddenly, instead of a phenomenon they could juice out interviews from to promote their own artists, BTS was becoming someone who was taking away awards from their very own artists. BTS were stealing their audience, their source of money. They were selling out shows that their artists didn't even think about in record-breaking times. BTS were climbing higher on charts. What was so different about these Korean artists that they were just refusing to leave? Kinda makes you see why the West went from seemingly loving BTS to making shady articles about them or creating new rules out of thin air in order to dim their shine. But BTS were staying put. They were out-charting and outselling. So while yes, Wonder Girls and psy and Girls' Generation did so much for K-pop, including BTS, you cannot deny that what they failed at during their attempt at breaking into the mainstream, BTS accomplished. Not to say that these artists didn't make huge strides, they just didn't do what BTS did, just like BTS didn't do what they did. And let me just say, you don't make blueprints of bridges that collapse. You want blueprints of bridges that stay up. Bridges where hundreds of cars and buses and trucks can pass over successfully without dropping into the ocean midway. And BTS are that successful blueprint. This is why K-pop giants like EXO, Girls' Generation, and 2NE1 couldn't make it onto these huge charts and award shows, but newer groups like Stray Kids, NewJeans, and TXT are able to. It's not fair to say they have more impact than these second-generation giants, but it is fair to say that it is now easier for them to make it onto these international platforms because BTS unlocked that door. K-pop songs now make it into these worldwide charts without being huge memes or viral sensations. It doesn't mean that BTS didn't benefit from those before them, but it also doesn't mean that those before them or after them are not benefiting from BTS either. It's a door that you can pull and push. And for ARMYs, just because BTS paved the way doesn't mean other groups who benefit from this paved way don't have to work for their success. They might not have to spend as much time unlocking doors, but they still have to walk on that path all by themselves. BTS opened up a path, they're not driving you there. And even for BTS being the blueprint is a plan. You still need to put the work in to make the plan successful. And as much as I do not want to talk about this next topic because there's very few ways to talk about this without making it a fan war issue, I do have to lightly touch on the quote, pave their own way saying that fans of some groups like BLACKPINK use. It is definitely true that women have a harder time navigating a world that is essentially built for men, but in this context, you need to understand that BLACKPINK and other groups like them have definitely benefited from BTS's success a lot, especially groups who rely heavily on international fan bases. BTS are definitely not the reason they are successful. That is all up to their hard work and their company's promotions. But hey, doesn't having a blueprint make it a bit easier? And this is definitely not a drag or anything, so please don't take it that way, but come on, how can you say BTS aren't the blueprint when groups now are basically trying to achieve the BTS formula just years later? I will say, however, the BTS plan might get you that mainstream platform, but it is not what makes you a long-lasting legend. The reason why BTS went from a phenomenon to untouchable success isn't a simple formula. It is not a code to be cracked. It could be anything from the perfect combination of the members to the dedication they have for their music and their fans, to their down-to-earth and charitable personalities, or the variety of genres and incredible lyricism in their music, or any combination of such. And you can fake it, but if you really want to make it, you can't replicate genuine emotions towards art. And this is definitely not something I am saying with a specific group in mind, it's just towards this idea of replicating the BTS success. So, in short, what have we learned today? BTS are the blueprint and indeed paved the way. They were not the first to make it into the mainstream market, just the ones who did it successfully. There could be varying reasons for that. BTS have benefited from artists before them, and those artists can also benefit from BTS. BTS paving the way doesn't mean they deserve credit for others' success. Genuine organic success cannot be replicated. And you should definitely like this video and subscribe to my channel. And now that my voice is ready to crumble, that is all for this video. I hope it gives you better insight into a topic that for some reason gets people really riled up, but is pretty straightforward. And I guess if you take one thing away from this video, let it be the fact that BTS worked very hard and went through a lot of the most heinous comments from the K-pop community as well as the West. From racist remarks to literal foots along the entire path trying to trip them up as they pave the way. So, acknowledge it.